Good morning, everyone. It is Sunday morning at 9:30, and welcome to Messages from Jesus. This is Pastor Ed Anderson out in Phoenix, Arizona. Hopefully, everyone is doing well this morning and being safe. I know that there's been a crazy week of upticks in COVID-19 around the nation, and protests flared up again last night. In fact, here in Arizona, we had, I think it was something like 4,000 National Guard deployed down into Tucson to, no, wait a second, it was 4,000 protesters, and National Guard was deployed down there to try to quell what was going on. So, anyways, there's just a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world, and you probably heard that in Russia there was an oil spill. And so this morning, what I thought I'd do is take some time to take a look at the subject of the environment. So, and what does the Bible say about it? And as Christians, how do we deal with these issues when we deal with the issue of the environment? So again, as I was talking about, this is a picture that was just taken about 48 hours ago, and this is up in the Russian territory where diesel fuel was spilled, and there you see it impacted a lot of the countryside and a lot of the wilderness area. This is a map here of where the diesel spill actually occurred and how it flowed into the river sections there. So you can see that it kind of spilled up near the head of that river, and then it kind of went through the fork, and it kind of like percolated all the way around it. And it was flowing downriver to where you get down in the south there, you see that there's a whole tributary that was completely just devastated there. This is some of the photos that they took of some of that oil. A lot of that was crude oil, and you can see there that it just kind of mucked up, mixed in with all that dirt. Oil, as you know, is organic, and eventually it will, through several hundreds or who knows how many years, it'll break down eventually. However, it is a natural disaster that has occurred just literally in the last 72 hours. So they're dealing with this now while we're dealing with protests. Um, uh, there's this coronavirus thing that's beginning to rise up again. Ebola has showed up again in Africa. And so now we're dealing with this. And then, by the way, there's these hurricanes that are just about ready to slam in our Gulf Coast here in the United States. Here in Russia, they're cleaning up, so they're taking these transfer pumps, and they are able to pump a lot of that diesel and that oil into these containment units, and then see what they can try to do separation of the oil from that water. So they are trying to do their best to clean up. So no doubt this issue that's occurred in Russia just really brought up this concern for what's going on our planet. Global warming. We see issues of air pollution from industries and manufacturers from all around the world, as we see chemicals being emitted through carcinogenic smoke. It's beginning to be of some concern for many people around the globe. And as you take a look at the impact of um, what we do with our nuclear waste and our toxic waste, we can see that there's been many homesteads that were actually forced to be abandoned as a result of the toxic fumes and the extreme health risk that our industries have actually caused. I wanted to show you this just to show and prove that man actually has an impact on our environment. This is a satellite photo that was taken sometime between January 1 through January the 20th of just this year, 2020. And the satellite kind of shows sulfur pollution that was hovering over the Wuhan district in China. So that whole section there of China is heavily industrialized. And so you can see that a lot of the manufacturing plants that produce these toxic waste, you can actually pick it up on satellite imagery. And you notice there where it's yellow, That's where all of the pollution is. And then as it gets into that dark, sort of brownish area, that's where it's the highest concentration of sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide and all of the really poisonous toxic gases that are produced as a result of M4 high level manufacturing, or the production of things that could be harmful to people. Now, as you know, in Wuhan, that's where the coronavirus pandemic actually began. And so the government of China enforced a mandatory quarantine of that whole region, that whole part of the country. And so manufacturing plants were shut down. People were forced to stay home. As a result of that, there were people who weren't traveling on the streets. There was less burning of carbon fuels in that area because, of course, people were either dying of the coronavirus or they were very sick, and so manufacturing couldn't happen. So when the satellite came over that section of China in the next month, and this is literally just 30 days later, okay, so February 10th through the 25th, okay, you notice in that area there just how the lack of industrialized activity really cleaned up the air, and it only took 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, for this positive impact to occur in that region there, and that was caused by the virus. Here's another satellite photo, and maybe you can squint your eyes a little bit. It's a little bit small, but this was taken a month later between March and April there in Europe in 2019. So as you know, the coronavirus began to sweep west, and it started to invade Europe, and then it came into the United States, or I should say infect Europe, not invade it. So March, April 2019 this is the photo that was taken last year of the pollution that was occurring over Paris, France. You notice little pockets there, like around Madrid. You'll notice that right there around Italy, right in the Central Europe area. This is sort of a satellite photo of what the pollution that was being created in places like Germany and other industrialized European nations, what it would cause. Well, after the pandemic, 1 year later, the top photo is what it looked like last year, March to April 2019. And then 1 year later, after the coronavirus swept west, you can see that it forced a lot of people into their homes. As you know, Italy was really hit hard, and so was Spain. And you notice there that near Paris, there was a minus 54%, plus or minus 15% decrease in the pollution that was going out in the environment. If you take a look at Milan, there was almost a 50% decrease, plus or minus 15%, of dangerous toxic fumes as a result of people staying home because of illness caused by the coronavirus. And if you look down in Rome and you look at Madrid, again, almost 50% reduction, literally just because of the impact of people just taking some time to try to live, actually in this case, but no activity going on, so obviously the natural product of that is going to be less pollution. But I bring this up to drive home the very important point, and that is that we actually have an impact on our planet. What we do and what we don't do can actually have a negative or a positive impact on planet Earth. Now, there's a story I want to start off with, and the story goes something like this. So there was this man who drove up to a seafood restaurant in Europe, and he kept his engine of his car running, okay, while he walked in to this restaurant, and in his hand he was carrying this bucket, and in the bucket was some water. So just imagine the scene. You're eating your food at the seafood restaurant, and this guy just walks in. He leaves his car out running in the driveway there, and he's coming in with a pail of water, okay? And before anyone knew what was going on, and knew what was actually happening, he went over to the tank that held all of the the lobsters, this aquarium there. Okay, so if you're not familiar with how seafood works, when you go in, you can pick out your lobster, and then they'll grab it. You notice the rubber bands around the pinchers, so the cooks don't get pinched. You can grab that lobster and then you cook it fresh. Okay. Well, this individual didn't go in to grab a lobster to have supper alongside his baked potatoes and his beans and his corn. That's not what he was there for. What he did was he reached in and he grabbed the largest lobster he could grab at that moment, and he dropped him in the bucket, and then he took off and made a fast getaway outside the door. Okay, so as the story is told, he went and he drove all the way to the ocean, and just a few miles away, he took that lobster and he threw him back into the ocean. He got into a boat, and he was one of these environmentalists, and he dropped this lobster back into the ocean. And the news, when they covered that story, they called it the Great Lobster Rescue. Okay, the Great Lobster Rescue. And it was one lobster who actually had his life saved. Okay, now the man was deemed a hero by some people. Others, he was deemed a thief, particularly to the restaurant owners who had to pay for that lobster. They viewed him as a thief, all right? And this individual was rather an extreme environmentalist. Okay, so we have those in the United States, and even when I was in the East Coast, Greenpeace ships were there. Okay, so we know what that's like. Okay, they want to make a statement, and the statement is really a simple one. It's just be careful about how humans treat the environment. Okay, how do humans treat the environment? And we can have a positive or a negative impact. And sure, this one lobster was just one lobster, but in this individual's mind, okay, it was a symbol. It was an act that would cause people to think about how humans exploit the environment, and sometimes to our very own detriment. Now, there's another story I want to tell you about, and it was several years ago here in the United States. And there was this powerful government official who caused quite a stir when he said that he didn't care about what would happen to the environment at all. Okay, he didn't worry at all about preserving natural resources for now or for the future generation. And when the media asked him why is it that this powerful government official, why don't you worry about issues like the environment? Well, here's what he said. And I kid you not, he said this. He said, Jesus was coming soon, and issues like environmental protection and natural resources would no longer be important. Okay, so this guy was such a Jesus freak that he just totally, because he believed that Jesus was coming very soon. I mean, I believe that too, but I mean, this guy took it to the extreme and said because he believed that Jesus was coming soon, that he didn't care about the environment or the natural resources. I mean, he was basically saying the whole world's going to go to hell anyways. Jesus is coming soon, so I don't really care about it. Okay. Now, what does the Bible actually say about that? And so this is what he used. This is what the Bible, the Bible text that he used in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10 to 12, 10 through 12. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Okay, so there he's talking about the second coming of Jesus, and at the second coming, everything in heaven and in earth is going to pass away. And then it goes on, both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. And then it goes on and it reads, therefore, since all these things will be dissolved. So this is his conclusion. Since all these things are dissolved, what manner of person ought you to be? So this is the part where he missed, because he applied this text to the environment, when in reality, Peter was trying to say, because we know that Jesus is coming soon and all of these things are going to be dissolved, you need to consider what your relationship is with God. But to this government official, he said, no, you know what? I'm just going to apply this to the environment, which, of course, this is not what God was talking about. This is certainly not what Peter was writing about. But let me just go ahead and finish it. It says, "What manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat." Now, that's really clear, but it's only clear when you see it through the lens of the Bible. So this should not be used for environmentalists. They're actually saying, because we know Jesus is coming soon, what is your relationship with God? Are you right with God? Okay, so this is not a question of whether, well, since Jesus is coming, we shouldn't care about the environment, right? Okay, well, we see this idea in Daniel chapter 2 as well. So in this story, great king Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. And in the dream, it was a dream of the rise and fall of empires that began from Babylon, would sweep through Persia and Greece and the Roman Empire. And it was a prophecy that prophesied the division of the Roman Empire into 10 kingdoms, which today makes up the Europe nations. Okay. Now, in this prophecy, at the end of that prophecy, it does predict the end of all of the kingdoms on earth, where Jesus would come. So here's where it said, and this word, pick it up. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all crushed together. So in this prophecy, every one of the metals symbolized a kingdom. But it says at the end, it says all of these kingdoms are going to be crushed together. And they became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So here we're talking in the prophecy about the second coming of Jesus. So just to go back on this, I mean, it talks here about there'll be no trace of any of these kingdoms. There'll be no evidence of them found. Okay, so it sounds like a pretty complete eradication, right? And let's not forget what Peter was talking about here. He's actually talking about Earth's destruction. And Peter, he goes on in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 13, "Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heaven and a new earth in which righteousness dwells." So both Daniel and Peter were looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth, but they never applied this to the planet Earth. They only applied this, the point of the Earth being destroyed was only a matter of fact as a result of Jesus coming. So the real points of these two texts, which a lot of environmentalists like to use, is really about what is your relationship with God. Okay? So even though there's a new heaven and even though there's a new earth and all of these things are going to be eradicated and God is going to recreate things, okay, we still have to be concerned about our home right now, the planet right now. Now, in the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah, chapter 65, verse 17, has this to say, "For behold, I create a new heaven and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind." Okay, so even in the Old Testament, it talks about how things will be made new. And you have to wonder why. Why is it that God has to create things brand new? And I believe that the reason is because we have, and Satan has really wreaked havoc on this planet to the point where it's no longer the planet that God had intended. Okay, we have destroyed it enough to the point where there are certain things that are not are beyond maybe some control. Now we know that if we pull back from certain activities, that some of the pollutions could clean up, but as we continue to do our industry and we continue to grow in population, we're going to still have these oil spills like what happened up there in Russia. We're still going to have air pollution that we've seen in China and in Europe, and it takes things like pandemics to help the earth recover a little bit, okay? Now, the question still remains, though, how do we actually so if we know that we have to live on this planet and we know we have an impact on it and we know that the environment actually has a impact on our health. Now, remember, the reason I'm talking about this is because we're doing a short little series on Sunday mornings at 9:30 on health and what does the Bible say about it. And we've talked about things like fresh air, our belief systems. We talked about what we eat. We talked about water. Okay, so today I'm talking about something else, and that is, for starters, what can we do, and what does the Bible say we should do when it comes to things like pollution and environmental kinds of concerns, okay? Because we know that our minds are actually impacted, our spirit and our emotions and our mental stability is actually impacted by our health. If our physical well-being isn't doing very well, it has a negative impact on the spiritual and on the emotional and the mental, okay? So the concept of air and sun and soil and water, as well as food and all of the animals, all of that really tight balance in the ecosystems is very important because it's very supportive of you and I and sustaining our well-being in our life here on the planet. Now, as we take a look at the environment, and this is a really cool picture in my own home state of Arizona, we have the Grand Canyon here, and we try to keep our state as pristine as possible. I mean, the people who live in Arizona go out of their way to make sure that we keep our national parks clean, that we really advocate for our state and federal lands because we have Indian tribes here, as well as we're very conscious of our fresh air, the beautiful trees that we have. So, but it's not like that everywhere. So, in the state of Arizona, industrial parks are actually very much zoned in particular areas and not in all areas. So there's a lot of codes that need to be kept because of the pristine natural resources in the state of Arizona. And as we look at how a state like Arizona supports the environment, we have to take a look at a broader view of the entire United States and then onto Canada and South America and around the globe. And that is everybody on that same page, okay? And the truth is that not everybody is on that same page because at the end of the day, industry and competitive corporate world sometimes trump natural resources. Now, pollution, for example, of water and air, as we see this pollution go out into the environment, destroying things like, for example, natural habitats, okay? These massive industrializations are beginning to threaten even very communities of life where more than animals, we're actually seeing it have negative impacts on the human population. And it's difficult to maintain health because we're seeing upticks in rises of things that are caused by the environment. For example, the rise in lung cancer in Los Angeles because of the pollution, etc. Okay, and even though you can try your hardest to take great care of your health by watching what you eat and what you put in and how you exercise, sometimes there's just nothing you can do about the fact that you live in an area where there might be toxic waste or where there might be pollution in the air that you breathe that could have dire health impact on you. When I grew up in Los Angeles, I was born and raised near Redondo Beach. And one of the things that growing up as a teen that I loved to do with my brother and with my friends was surf. So my family's from Hawaii, and I grew up in California. And one of the things that we did was ride our bikes, go roller skating along the ocean, and then go surfing. And I'm a scuba diver. Now, one of the things back in the 1980s when we were doing these things, the waters were actually still pretty clean, but we started to get this problem with the Hyperion plant. So here's a picture of the El Segundo Hyperion plant where a lot of the waste that's coming in from Los Angeles is going out into the ocean, and they try to clean it up and burn it up as much as they can. But the problem is there was too much because the population kept growing. Now today there's over 10 million people that live in Los Angeles. Today if I were to go surfing now, I would actually, as I'm walking along the beach with my surfboard, I'd be stepping on oil goblets because of the digging of oil in the ocean bottom there. Some of the big drillers of this would be companies like Arco and Shell and Chevron. These big petroleum companies found natural big resources of oil out in the Pacific Ocean, right near the coastline of Los Angeles. So now a lot of these little black oil balls will come up in the form of tar, and it'll just litter the beaches. And as you're walking, you're getting it on your feet. It's hard to get out, but it's still beautiful. So you want to go out there and you go surfing, and you have to be careful because we have great white sharks out there, but there's also dolphins and there's seals out there. The problem is now when you go out, um, you'll be running into things like plastic and some of the effluent that's coming out of the El Segundo Hyperion plant. So this is just a personal experience that I've seen just literally in the last few decades that have occurred as a result of population growth in Los Angeles. Now, did you know that 50 years ago, lead poisoning, for example, was one of lead poisoning was really common, and here's the reason. Lead was used in paint, lead was used in toys. And so as kids would sit there and chew on their toys, or people would live in their homes not realizing that lead poisoning was happening, we began to see, physicians began to notice that people who were experiencing lead poisoning were having discoloration of the gums. They were getting bluish stippling in the blood cells. There are other signs of lead poisoning, and all of that was as a result of the lead that they were mixing into the paints and putting into the toys. Why? Why did they do it? Well, because if you put lead in paint, it actually made the paints look better. It gave it more luster, made it a little bit more attractive to the eye. It actually added more strength to the walls and strength to the toys, okay? But, children would start to pick the flakes off, and they would sit there and eat them like Kellogg cornflakes. And they start to see an uptick in lead poisoning. Now, that's another example. How about gasoline? Gasoline also contained lead back in the day. And lead was used to enhance its combustion properties. So this enhancement resulted in increased lead in the atmosphere. So as cars that were using this lead fuel, it began to be an effluent through the pollution of the exhaust, and it went into the air. And guess what? People were inhaling all of this lead poisoning. Okay? And this is why when you go to the gas station, no one knows the reason why you're putting in unleaded fuel. Okay, so you can get different octanes of fuel, but it's all going to be unleaded fuel. Why is it unleaded? Because lead is a pollution that used to be in gasolines, and now today in modern day vehicles, it doesn't need it. Okay, now just imagine that same problem in the 1970s and the 1980s happening around the globe. I mean, it was horrible. Now, a little pollution here, no big problem. Okay, a little destruction of a few trees over in that little part of the world, no problem, right? The dumping of raw sewage in California into the ocean, no big deal. It's the Pacific Ocean, right? It's massive, okay? No big deal. But think about this. If everybody was doing it on the planet, okay, the billions of people on the planet, they're putting all this pollution out, a little here, a little there. Guess what's going to happen? That little thing is going to multiply by millions, and eventually it's going to have a negative impact on the entire planet. Okay? Now, a single automobile may emit what would be insignificant pollutants. Now, that would be no problem if it was only the one vehicle that existed on the entire planet. How many vehicles do you think exist on the planet? I mean, you could probably just think about Los Angeles alone. Okay, think about how many vehicles are in Los Angeles alone. Okay, now mushroom that out to the whole state of California. And remember, that's just one state in 50 states. Think about all the vehicles in the United States. Then expand that to the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, all the way across the globe to China and Europe and Asia's. Okay, so you can see real quickly here how world population mushrooming and the need for vehicle and transportation can create a situation where pollution caused just by one single thing, and that is vehicles, can create a possible problem for the environment. Now, I'm going to read something here to you. Current projections, okay, which incorporates projected declines in growth rates, still predict a global population somewhere between 8 and 10.5 billion individuals by the year 2050. Okay, so the effects of overpopulation um, depend on the ratio of population to the sustainable resources that are available on the planet. Okay, and then beyond that, you have to also calculate into it the supply chain and how resources are actually distributed around the planet. So that would be things like clean water, um, clean air, food, shelter, and these appropriate climatic conditions. Now, just think about this. If right now, if we're somewhere around say 7 billion people and we're already tasking the earth, okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about global warming, but whatever the impact is that population has on the planet, in spite of how big our planet is, we can see that we are having an impact. Imagine what it's going to be like in the next 40 years when our population continues to grow, but our resources stay the same. Okay, so you can see real clearly here that the math is going to tell you that we gotta think about things. Now, what will it look like in the future for my children? And what would it look like in the future for your children or your nephews and your nieces? Okay. If the Lord hasn't returned yet, the prospects for the planet doesn't look too promising if we continue on the pathway that we're going, especially for certain parts of the world, like, for example, in the United States or in places like Asia, where a lot of industry is actually happening. So if you just take those two countries, and if we don't change anything at all, and the population continues to grow, and which means that there's a need for more resources. At the same time, we're going to be putting in more pollutants into the planet. You can see if we're dealing with the problem now, in 40 years from now, when the population has grown and the resources has either stayed the same or declined, we're going to have some pretty big problems, right? And as we think about overpopulation damaging the environment, think about what it does to the nation's economy. Okay, when a country is not able to even feed its own population, consequently, what's going to have to happen, and what's already happening in many countries, is that they have to purchase and import food from other parts of the world. People take up space that's needed, you know, um, for farms. So if we're going to be replacing farmland and forest, and replace it with residential areas, we're not going to be able to plant. We're not going to be able to maintain clean water resources because we're diverting these natural streams to other areas. So that way we can try somehow to preserve the water in natural reserves. And right now here in California on the West Coast, there's this massive war between the farmers and the ranchers who gets the water rights, and the water's flowing in from the mountains. And so, this is an issue we're dealing with now. Imagine what it's going to be like in the next several years from now. Now, overpopulation presents some serious difficulties for places around the world, okay, for governance. And it actually can cause a lot of stress. Consequently, the stress and turmoil that often ensue, okay, in the government, all right, are the very reasons why governments seek war and try to expand their boundaries and try to retain resources. Okay, they're trying to handle the ability to feed their own population, and the only way that they can do it is by either gaining other resources from other countries, or try to find a way of preserving its ability to provide shelter, food, water, and security for its population. So all these conflicts that we see right now always have those basic needs in mind. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Like, for example, you'll have these dictators who will do things just because they want power. It has nothing to do at all with natural resources, okay? Now, closely related to overpopulation is the issue, like I said, of sustainable agriculture. Okay, now there have been a lot of improvements. I have my wife's family are into farming, and I kind of follow this farming issue around the nation kind of closely because here in Phoenix, a lot of people don't realize, but there's a lot of agriculture in the West Valley of Phoenix. And there's been a lot of improvements in agricultural technology that have really led to some enormous increases in the yield of produce per acre of land. Now, those are farmers that have science behind them. They've been doing it for generations. They have technology behind them. They got the tools. A person like me who tries to grow something, for some reason, I always seem to get to the germination state and I can never get my plants to grow beyond that, okay? But put me and you who are suffering from this lack of green thumb to the side, even though there has been great advancements in agricultural technology where farmers have been able to really yield high production of produce per acre of land, okay? There's still an environmental cost to all of this. Okay, because of these further changes in agricultural priorities, okay, there has been this imbalance of the utilization of land. And, while we're thinking about the utilization of land, um, for example, the deforestation that's occurring in the Pacific Northwest, it's actually happening around the globe on a massive scale. Okay, why is that happening? It's happening because there needs to be more places for people to live. We're trying to create more farmlands, even though we've improved a lot of these things. One thing leads to another. There's a ripple effect. So even though we've had these advancements, we've discovered that the population is growing so fast we can't produce it, or we can't supply it quick enough, or we can't make enough money to make it worthwhile to grow. Okay, there's all these different factors that go into this. All right, as you know, you probably heard that millions of dollars and pounds of produce and um, meats had to be destroyed because of the coronavirus. They couldn't get this produce and meats out to the markets fast enough because everyone was sick. Okay, so in these cases, which are the exception, what we're seeing is deforestation is occurring because we need the wood for building, we need the land for farming, and as a result of that, this deforestation that's happening around the globe, we've noticed that there has been a negative impact on the climate. Now, why would you think that that would be so? Well, as you know, plants are essential for oxygen and for taking in carbon dioxide. So this issue of balance and the global climate is actually impacted directly by things like water and plant life. So there is this ecosystem that needs to maintain a proper balance, and if it's thrown off kilter just a little bit, we begin to see the impact around the globe. Now, as we see here, for example, from the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines, and this is where my dad is from. My dad is actually an American citizen. He passed away last year, but he claims Filipino. He speaks all the dialects there, like Tagalog and Ilocano and Kapampangan. But he tells me about the rice fields and what he had to experience. Well, I was in the Philippines last year, and so I got these statistics that talk a little bit about climate change and how it influences production. So I actually have some friends. I have a good friend whose family does rice production. He's a fellow pastor, and so I was doing some research because I was thinking about investing in a rice field there in Mindoro, okay, in the island of Mindoro near San Jose. And I was thinking, well, the people need work. I'm going to invest in rice. So I need to do a little research so I know what I'm investing in. And so here's what I found. According to the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines, so there's actually a Rice Research Institute, okay? They found that rice production declined by 10% for each 1 degree centigrade increase in the growing season. So what they've noticed, and this is an actual figure that they came out with, okay, that there has been a 1 degree centigrade increase in the temperature in the Philippines, okay, and what they noticed is that rice production declined by 10% for every 1 degree of the temperature change. All right. Now, nighttime minimum temperature, some researchers have reported that climate change even impacted that. So when they were studying this from 1981, they studied the result of the annual loss of rice there in the Philippines. And when they calculated how much was lost since 2002 to the country of the Philippines, they calculated at $5 billion. Okay, that's not pesos, that's dollars. Now, this is just in the last 18 years. So what they've been able to track here is that in the Philippines, where they're growing rice, they've noticed that there was an increase in the temperature, which has had a negative impact on the rice production. All right, so needless to say, well, first of all, it's impossible for an American citizen to actually buy land in the Philippines if you're not a Filipino citizen. And it's very dangerous and risky to invest finances in a place right now in the Philippines because um, of the COVID-19 situation and then the passage of money. So maybe in the future we'll look at investing. But right now, according to these statistics and the lack of revenue on my side, we'll have to pray for the Philippines, and we'll just hope that they can. And a country like Philippines that has this kind of loss is devastating. Okay, people like in America can recover, but those people who live in a third world country like Philippines, this will wipe them out, and you'll see starvation there. Now, as we know, reliance upon things like fossil fuels. So going back to this issue where we have to utilize energy. So my father-in-law is a retired Methodist pastor. And when he retired, he invested a lot of his resources and his time and energies into the oil wells found in West Tulsa. So I didn't have a picture of him because I would replace this picture with a picture of him at his oil rig. But every time I'm there, he wants to go hunting or we're just spending time. He wants to spend time with the grandkids. So I just made up this picture here. And just to illustrate the point that fossil fuels are still very effective. And he would want me to say that it's essential for the economy, particularly his economy. But, we still need fossil fuels today. So I think that what I'm trying to say is I'm not saying get rid of all of these things, but there has to strike a balance between things that make sense and things that might be a little oppressive. All right. Not only to the environment, which is what we're talking about, but oppressive to those individuals that actually work in these industries to supply the natural resources to help fuel our vehicles, our motorcycles, our homes, etc. Right? Um, so let's take a look at another alternative here, nuclear power. So nuclear power works really well, but as we all know, it comes with a lot of dangerous risk. All right, regardless of the cost issues, energy conservation is an important part of environment preservation, especially because of pollution. And areas of pollution that are of particular concern we find is places like the water and air. And as we noticed industry increasing, we've noticed an increase also in the pollution of waterways and in the pollution of air. So I think that this is the balance that we need to strike here, is that as people, we need to make sure that we realize that there's some things that won't degrade very easily. So we have to look at other options. Plastics, for example, will take decades to break down, and eventually it will break down. So don't get me wrong. A lot of these plastics are biodegradable, but the cellulose that was used to produce these plastics would take literally years to break the plastics down, and many times the plastic particles will remain in existence much longer than the cellulose that they are relying on to break down those plastics. Okay, so we just have to monitor the balance there. Sun, wind, wave action merely fragment plastic into many different pieces, but eventually most of plastics, as I mentioned, will find its way into places like the ocean, where people like me who like to scuba dive and surf, you're going to see evidence of these things in our very oceans. And actually, because I told you I'm a scuba diver, there's a whole movement right now of environmental movement in California. They're looking for scuba divers like myself. I'm a rescue diver who can go out into the ocean down to about 15 to 30 feet into the Pacific Ocean to help clean up what they call nurdles. Now, what nurdles are little pieces of plastic that the krill are beginning to eat, because krill, is the main source of food for a lot of sea life. And this krill is trying to feed on these nurdles that's actually derived from plastic. And they're discovering that there's way too much of it in the Pacific Ocean, right at the depths of 15 to 30 feet. So it's not even on the surface anymore. A lot of the stuff has sunk down deep and it's beginning to impact that mid level of the ocean. So they're looking for scuba divers who can go down there and help clean up some of those areas where we see industrial waste. So here's a picture here of a horrible situation that occurred in 2011. So the radioactive contamination following the 2011 earthquake that occurred, it caused this massive tsunami and it hit Fukushima, Japan. Okay, and basically what happened was that earthquake that caused a tsunami that broke down that city. There is a lot of plants there that produced a lot of heavy metal pollutants like lead, mercury, and cadmium, and a lot of that stuff got leaked out. All those toxic dioxins went into the underground fresh water, and it contaminated it. So they had to evacuate all of the individuals. And I'm going to tell you something that that place there, Fukushima, is probably going to be vacant. No one can go there probably for maybe hundreds of years. And many of you remember the Chernobyl disaster in the Ukraine in 1986 that resulted from a nuclear explosion. Well, the individuals there, you know, if you see pictures, it's pretty haunting because they evacuated the whole cities and everyone just dropped everything that they had and they left. I mean, it looks like ghost towns there, right? Well, the people who fled there, they noticed that there was a increase in thyroid and other types of cancers as a result of the radioactive isotopes that actually leached into the water, okay? And people were drinking that. So that's what happened there. You know, outbreaks of disease frequently are related to viruses like the coronavirus or Ebola virus that we're dealing with now, okay? Now, this coronavirus is novel, which means that it's something new. And it's going through lots of mutations. And these mutations, you know, these viruses that are derived from animals and human waste or the hygiene issues around the world, all of these bacterial things that are popping up actually have an indirect cause from issues like water effluents and natural resources being destroyed. There are actually towns in various parts of the world where life expectancy currently exists at medieval rates. Okay, in other words, you know where men and women should live anywhere between 70 to 90 years old. Nowadays, they're noticing in these areas that have a lot of contamination, the life expectancy rates are really super low. I mean, it's at the level of the dark ages. And they're noticing that a lot of the younger people, children, are going through a lot of genetic deformities as a result of changes in their DNA that are caused by environmental issues like what we're talking about here. The American Lung Association estimates that roughly 50% of Americans live in counties that have unhealthful levels of either ozone or pesticide pollution. Okay, so that's pretty alarming by this report that the American Lung Association put out. That's a lot. I mean, if you think about it, half of Americans live in unhealthful levels of the country where there's pollution. The University of Southern California, USC. Okay, so this school here is right down the street from where I lived, and there's what you see here are pictures of these industries that are just around there. They studied residents in 12 communities within a 200-mile radius of the city of Los Angeles. So they went all the way around Southern California, and they did this study. And they had followed 3 groups of children within these communities, and quite convincingly have shown interference with lung growth in those who live in more populated and more polluted atmospheric conditions. So they were trying to see what kind of risk was being caused by air pollution and manufacturing pollution right around Los Angeles. And it was convincing. They showed that even within a 200-mile radius that there was a negative impact on individuals. And I have to say, one of the reasons that my wife Angela and I left Southern California was because, one, we want to be near my family, but two, the traffic, the pollution, the danger, and the high cost of living in a place like Pasadena or Los Angeles just wasn't worth it anymore. So we came to a nice, clean environment like the state of Arizona. So remember the big issue years ago you remember in China during the Olympic Games, they were talking a little bit about how the world would have an issue with the Olympic Games there because the air pollution was just so bad. And so there were actually days in China, if you remember the news reports, where they actually told the people that they were not allowed to go outside. They actually had a quarantine of individuals during that time. And they said that the air is so polluted that you're not going to be able to breathe. Okay. Let's talk about the sun. Okay, so as we think about the sun is central to the provision of energy, right, to the planet. And much of this radiation is important to the well-being. But if you think about that sun coming down on the planet, there's that very delicate layer that keeps too much radiation coming through. So there was a time back in the 70s when going out and getting ultraviolet radiation, we need it for vitamin D production. But there was a time when we didn't worry so much about sunscreen. Well, today, because of the decrease in the ozone layers, okay, and because that we've seen the power of the sun coming through, we've noticed that there has been an increase in a lot of problems. Now, so for example, the sun helps nature, helps things grow. It helps us. We need it. We need vitamin D. But when you get too much of it, what happens is that you're going to start to get what? Cancer, skin cancer. Now, those of us who have darker pigmentation, okay, you can handle a little bit more of the sun. But even those of us who have darker pigmentation still need to consider using sunscreen because overexposure is going to be bad for us. There was a time when we never had to worry about that. Dermatologists have noticed the association between getting sunburns and skin cancer. I know what that's like. So even though my family comes from Hawaii and Philippines, I'm also half Swedish. And I can actually get sunburned. And I know what it's like to be sunburned. And I tell you, it's so painful. I worry sometimes if my sunburns would turn into skin cancer. And many dermatologists have found connections between that. So this is why they advocate for avoiding overexposure, and you need to use sunscreen because what you don't want is to go through a skin graft because of cancer. So again, like I said, on the other hand, so it's striking the balance. So I'm trying to present the issues of environmental. Now, my daughter, Crystal, our oldest daughter, is an environmentalist. She is an engineer for General Electric. She's into clean energy, so she's into windmills, solar. She always tries to tell me, Dad, it's important that we plant trees and that we keep our focus on the environment. And I agree with her. But at the same time, we also have to realize that there's a balance that we have to have. We need energy, we need the sun, but we still have to be very careful about how we treat our planet. We also have to be careful, and you remember I mentioned this, about what we put into our bodies. For example, alcohol and tobacco. So if we know that putting things in our body, we have to be careful, then we should also know that we have to be good stewards, not only of our body, but the earth that supplies us the other things that we need. For example, sunlight and air and water. You and I, are responsible for managing the earth's resources. We are responsible for the environment that surrounds our bodies, more than just what we put into our bodies, but those things that impact our bodies, things that we quote unquote can't control. So we're more than mere physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual beings. All right, we possess all of these things together. So we need to make sure that we have balance there. But I put this picture up because we know that another aspect of our environment could be more than just air, water, and food, but it's also how we treat each other. That domestic violence, that tension, the anger, the fear that we often put it in our environment that might be caused by alcohol, that domestic violence that creates abuse, whether it's emotional or verbal abuse. Okay, that's very common happening right now in this pandemic. People have to learn to get along. And maybe this is why there's a lot of riots too, because it really brought to bear the injustices and inequities that are just under the surface of our quote unquote society that seems to be civilized. And yet we go home and we know that that's not the case, that there's a lot of oppression happening. There's another environment of anger and fear that's permeating. All of that is all connected. So when we think about who we are as an intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and physical beings, we also have to remember that there is a sixth sense that we have, and that is our ability to create tensions or release of tensions in our environment. How many of you went to a party or you visited somebody and you heard the statement, the air was thick. Okay, you can feel it, you can cut it with a knife. And normally what they're referring to is when you walked into a room, you knew that there was a massive fight that just happened. And even though the couple seemed to be smiling and everything seems to be okay, you can still sense it, you can still feel it. So that's a good proof that I'm telling you that there is another additional dimension to who we are as humans, that we can actually create the tensions and also the good stuff, the peace, the happiness by our very nature. Okay, and all of this is all interrelated. So what we eat, what we breathe, what we drink, how it impacts our physical well-being, our spiritual, has an impact on our faces and our overall well-being, and how we treat others, that can actually have a negative energy in the air that you can actually slice with a knife. Okay, so, of course, as you know, we are talking about the spiritual aspect here of the environment. So, my take on this is more than just a Greenpeace environmentalist, because I'm not that. It's more than just a scientist that says, oh, the world is going to go to hell because of global warming. Okay, I'm not that either. What I'm actually talking about is, what does the Bible actually have to say about this subject? And so, beyond the physical environment, beyond the emotional and the intellectual environment, I want to talk about the spiritual dimensions of our environment, okay? Because we live in a place where we need to create a very balanced, calm, and comforting, supportive environment, not only for couples, you and I, but also our children, all those around, okay? And the values that we teach our children come from a place and centered in the basis of our belief and trust in a loving God. And sometimes it's very difficult for us to think about those relationships with God when we're so worried about the food, the shelter, and the water. So this is why when I say what's happening on one side of the planet actually directly impacts what's happening to us here. We're all connected in one way or another, and we don't even realize that. So we can see here that starting with our own selves, with our own relationships with our wives, our significant others, our family, just creating that nurturing, comforting, happy environment is the start of controlling our environment. So let's talk a little bit and see what the Bible actually says. So in Psalm chapter 139, verse 14, it says, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So the first thing that the psalmist wants us to know is that when God created us, he created us with a very specific purpose in mind, that we were connected to the planet and that we needed the air to breathe, we needed the water, and we needed to eat, and we needed to have that relationship with each other because we're social beings and we're also spiritual beings, which means that we were intended to be one with the universe, one with God, one with the angels. So this is why David says, I will praise you, for I am fearfully. Okay, that's really a weird way of saying that you're awesome. Okay, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Okay, that means that when you consider the complexities of being human, it's actually so mind-boggling, it'll blow your mind. Okay, when you just look at one system alone, and then, for example, the vascular system, and then you throw into that the nervous system, and then you throw into that the digestive system. Okay, you throw all these systems together, and that there's no way we could be an accident. So here David is saying, we're all together, we are fearfully, wonderfully made, marvelous are your works. So he brings it right back to God. and that my soul know very well. So, based on this, because we are made wonderfully, we need to be proactive to whatever degree it is to ensure that our relationship with God is solid, our relationship with each other is based in love, that we take care of our environment, and that we don't subject our children, ourselves, to these kinds of influences that could be detrimental to our bodies. Things like what we eat, what we put into our bodies, the air we breathe, the water we drink. Okay, all of these things. So use water filters. It's important you don't drink impure water. Make sure you eat healthy foods. If you have a voice, talk about what's actually happening to the planet that could be causing the lack in the ability to produce the kinds of things that we need to survive, like food and water and fresh air. Okay, so we need to be aware of all of these environmental concerns that are actually hitting the planet. And I'm going to give you a scriptural proof. Okay, so I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning. Take a look in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. Look at what God says. Now, he's talking to Adam and Eve here, and he put them in this garden, and notice what he told them what to do. He said, the Lord God took the man, he put him in the Garden of Eden, and look at what he was intended to do. Okay, he was to tend it, and he was to keep it, which means he was to care for it, and he was to keep it. He was to preserve it. Now, we're talking about the Garden of Eden, but it extended beyond that. It was the entire planet. So the purpose and the goal of humans was to take care of God's creation. So I'm going to drive it home here. The reason why Christians need to be concerned about the environment is because you were intended to be a steward of God's creation. That means the animals, okay, the mammals, the reptiles, the amphibians, the trees, the water, the sky, everything that God created. If you believe that you were created, if you believe in God, that he created the planet, and that he put you on the planet for a purpose, okay, then that automatically means, according to Genesis, that your job is to take care of it all. Okay? Now, I do know, like that guy who, that government official said, it's all going to burn, Jesus is coming again. Yeah, I believe that too. But here's the thing. Earth is our home right now. Okay? So if Earth is where we are right now, and God has called us to be stewards of what God created, then we need to take care of where we are now. Let's not go so far into the future. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of Yoda when he told Luke, your problem is you're always worried about where you're going and where you want to go. Never worried about now. And then he would take his little, remember that little Jedi thing or that little stick? He would say, never worry, you're worried about the future. You don't worry about what's happening now. Well, this is what I'm saying here. We need to be concerned about our home right now. Even though we're looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth, we are still on this planet. We still have to take care of our home now. Take a look at Acts chapter 17, verse 28. Paul even said, we live and we move and we have our being right here on the planet. So this is our home. So he's saying we look forward to the time when Jesus will come back again. But let's not be like that guy who says, well, let it all go to waste. It's not going to matter anyways. Well, if people have been talking like that, we wouldn't even have a planet anymore. Okay, so I believe Jesus is coming soon. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, we are good stewards. And to be a good steward means that you have to take care of the resources that God gave us. Not just your clothes, not just your car, not just the things that you have in your home and your possessions that God blessed you with, but the whole planet, every place that you can have a voice. If there's injustice, speak about that. If you see that there's an issue, then you need to bring awareness there. So this is all part of what God has called us to do. So this is our home. This is where we raise our families. I wish I was this guy who can just walk along these grapevines and pick bunches of grapes. Boy, wouldn't that be awesome. But here's a good point. He can pick those grapes because he's in fresh air. There's fresh fruit growing using fresh water that don't have any dangerous toxins. Okay, so we need to actually be Christian about this. And the Christian concern is environmental threats threaten the overall well-being of not only you, but threaten the overall well-being of your family and our society. Okay, so this is a biblical mandate. All right, we're going to close it out here. Let's take a look at Romans chapter 1, verse 25. And here we see Paul says, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. So why did I bring this up? Even though we should probably take care of the planet and take care of things in nature, it's important that we don't worship created things. So you can be really imbalanced there as well. So I know there's a lot of people who take this environmental thing all the way to the absurd, okay? And they begin to worship things like these animals who they feel might be threatened or whatever, okay? So you just have to you have to be balanced here. Worship the God who created all things, but don't worship the created things. Okay. I like to close out with a famous quote from Stephen Hawking. As you know, he was a famous physicist. And here is what he wrote about the fate of the earth due to environmental concerns. Our only chance of long-term survival. So this is Stephen Hawking saying, our only chance of long-term survival is not to remain lurking on planet Earth. Okay. So think about what he's saying. The only way that we're going to have long-term survival is to have no people. Okay? Our only chance of long-term survival is not to remain lurking on planet Earth, but to spread out into space. So he's basically saying this. He's saying if you want to save the planet Earth, then just remove humans off of the Earth. Man, these guys, these physicists, they're just something else. They come up with the really strange stuff. So he was actually talking about space exploration, long-term survival on the planet Earth. He said it's not going to be possible. And living on this planet is not a good concern. But you know what? I actually agree with him. So as absurd as what he said sounds, I put this up here because I want to let you know that the Bible actually said the same thing. The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in them will be all burned up. Okay, so Jesus is going to be coming. He's going to take us to heaven, and this planet is not going to survive, and Jesus will have to create a brand new heaven and a new earth. That's going to be awesome to watch. All right, Jesus, he gave himself as a ransom for you and I. He's coming back, and he alone is going to take us out of here. But until that time comes, until the day when he creates a new heaven and he creates a new earth, because I believe that those of you who are watching this right now have given your life to Jesus, and I believe that we will all be together. But in the meantime, until that happens, we all need to take care of our planet right now. It was a mandate he gave to Adam and Eve. It's something that Paul says that we are living on this planet now, so just appreciate it now and be a good steward of it. Well, this was a little bit more light subject. I told my wife, Angela, man, I've been doing a lot of heavy subjects over the last 4 weeks. And this particular week, I've really had a lot that I've been talking about regarding prophecy. So I said, let me talk a little bit about what happened with Russia and that oil spill and some of the interesting science that's come out of the positive stuff that came out of the coronavirus. If there is a silver lining, it's that the environment was positively impacted. So much so that, did you hear the stories? Chimpanzees are now taking the streets in India. There's animals are coming out in Yosemite, so wildlife is returning, so there are some positive things. And it got me thinking, maybe I should talk about that because, this is a biblical mandate to take care of the planet. Well, anyways, thank you all for joining me this morning. Messages from Jesus regarding the environment. Next week, we're going to come back again, and we're going to take maybe 2 more weeks in this area in health, and then we're going to switch it up a little bit. But thank you for coming at 9:30 and being with me. I'm going to sign off now, but I will be back on at 11 o'clock. So join me at 11 o'clock where we talk about a new day is coming. Until then, God bless everyone, and I pray that everyone will, again, stay safe out there, make wise choices, be careful with all the crazy stuff going on in our community, and most of all, if you can do a little bit something, maybe plant a tree. Add some oxygen and some greenery. We really need it in Phoenix anyway. So my kids are planting some things, and my nieces have been growing corn and other things out in their land that they have up there near Scottsdale. But just hug your families, enjoy life, and make sure you eat something good this week. All right. We'll talk to you later. God bless.